You open the fridge. You are not hungry. Not really. You just want something. A snack, a taste, a distraction. You grab it, eat it, close the door. You do this without thinking. You have done it 1,000 times before, and you will do it 1,000 times again. And you have never once asked yourself why. But the real answer for why you do this is far stranger than boredom. It goes back 3 million years to a version of you that never once opened a fridge, never once had a snack, and never once knew where the next meal was coming from. Your ancestors did not eat 3 meals a day. They did not eat breakfast. They did not eat a balanced plate. For most of human history, eating was not a routine. It was a gamble. And the way your body handles food today is a direct fossil of that gamble. Start with what you probably assume. You probably assume ancient humans ate meat. Big meat, mammoths, bison, heroic hunts with spears and fire. That image is not wrong exactly, but it is incomplete. It is also mostly modern invention, shaped by museum dioramas and documentaries that needed a dramatic scene. The truth is quieter and far more interesting. For the vast majority of our species' existence, most calories did not come from hunting. They came from gathering roots, tubers, nuts, insects, shellfish when near water, fruit when in season, which was rare and brief. Anthropologist Richard Wrangham, who has spent decades studying the diets of early humans, argues that the true turning point in human evolution was not the spear. It was the fire. Cooking food, he suggests, changed everything about what the human body could extract from a meal. Here is why that matters. Raw food takes enormous energy to digest. Your gut has to work overtime to break down tough plant fibers and raw meat. Cooking does some of that work for you. It softens tissue. It unlocks calories that would otherwise pass straight through you, unused. Wrangham's research suggests that once early humans started cooking consistently, they could survive on smaller guts and bigger brains. Digestion got easier. Thinking got more expensive. Your body made a trade. Think about that for a second. The device you are using to understand this sentence right now exists partly because your ancestors figured out how to make food easier to eat. But cooking came late in the story, at least on an evolutionary timescale. Before fire was reliable, before hunting was organized, the primary food source for early hominins was something far less glamorous. Tubers. Underground starches. Roots you had to dig for, with tools, with effort, often without knowing if anything was even down there. Digging for tubers sounds simple. It was not. A tuber gives no obvious sign it exists. No fruit hanging from a branch. No animal moving across open ground. Just a patch of dirt that looks like every other patch of dirt, unless you know exactly what kind of leaf pattern grows above it, and exactly how deep to dig, and exactly which season makes the root worth the effort. Get it wrong, and you spend an hour digging for nothing. Get it wrong often enough, and you starve. This is not a small skill. It is closer to an entire body of inherited knowledge, passed from person to person, generation to generation, long before anyone wrote anything down. And even when the digging worked, the reward was often modest. A single tuber might offer barely enough energy to justify the effort spent finding it, which meant early humans rarely worked alone. Foraging groups shared labor and shared risk. If one person found nothing, someone else usually had. This wasn't generosity in the way you might think of it today. It was insurance. A person who shares food today is a person who gets fed tomorrow when the roles reverse. This is where the idea of feast and famine begins. Not feast and famine as a saying, as a literal biological reality. Some days, your ancestors found a rich patch of tubers or stumbled onto an animal carcass abandoned by a predator, and they ate as much as their bodies could hold. Other days, they found almost nothing. There was no guarantee, there was no schedule, there was no fridge. Your body still remembers this, even though you don't. This is where the science gets personal. Researcher and evolutionary biologist Lauren Cordain has studied how modern human bodies are still, in many ways, tuned to an ancient feast or famine rhythm. Your body doesn't know the difference between "I skipped lunch because I was busy" and "there is no food anywhere and I might starve." It reacts the same way. It slows things down. It craves calories, especially fat and sugar, because those were once rare and valuable. In the ancient world, craving sugar wasn't a weakness. It was survival. Ripe fruit meant energy. Fat meant you might live through a lean season. Now picture a vending machine. Every single evolutionary signal that once helped your ancestors survive scarcity is still active inside you, standing in front of unlimited abundance. Your brain lights up at sugar the same way it did 50,000 years ago, back when sugar meant eat this now. You may not see it again. Except now, you might see it again in 5 minutes from the same machine for another dollar. This mismatch has a name. Scientists call it evolutionary mismatch, the idea that a trait built for one environment gets dropped into a completely different one and starts behaving strangely. Your craving for fat and sugar was not designed for a world with drive-thrus open at midnight. It was designed for a world where fat and sugar might not appear again for weeks. Think about what a modern food company actually sells you. Not a meal, a trigger. Salt, fat, and sugar combined in ratios almost never found together in nature, engineered specifically to light up the same reward pathways that once rewarded a lucky find of ripe fruit or fatty marrow. Your brain cannot tell the difference between an ancient stroke of luck and a factory formula built in a lab. It responds the same way either time. A rush. A craving for more. A feeling that this moment of abundance should be seized. Immediately, completely. Just in case it disappears. It won't disappear, of course. The shelf is restocked every morning. But your brain doesn't know that. It has no concept of a supply chain. It only knows the old rule. When food is available, eat as much as you can because you cannot know when the next opportunity will come. So what did people actually eat day to day before farming existed? The honest answer is, it depended entirely on where you lived. Near coastlines, shellfish were a steady, reliable source of protein and fat. Low effort compared to chasing large animals. In grasslands, tubers and roots made up a huge portion of calories, dug with sharpened sticks, sometimes for hours, for a meal the size of a modern side dish. In forests, nuts and seasonal fruit came and went in narrow windows, meaning early humans had to track time, location, and ripeness with astonishing precision, or go hungry. This is one of the most overlooked parts of ancient life. Foraging was not wandering aimlessly and hoping for luck. It required memory, complex, detailed memory. Which valley had berries in early summer? Which riverbank had edible roots after rain? Which trees dropped nuts before the first frost? Some researchers argue that the cognitive demands of remembering hundreds of edible plants, their locations, and their seasons may have been just as important to brain development as hunting ever was. Meat, when it did happen, was often not the triumphant kill you imagine. Scavenging played a larger role than most people assume. Early hominins likely took advantage of carcasses left behind by larger predators, cracking open bones with stone tools to reach the marrow inside, one of the most calorie-dense parts of an animal. Marrow doesn't spoil the way muscle does. It sits protected inside bone, waiting. For a species without refrigeration, without preservation, that mattered enormously. Paleoanthropologist Yale researcher Jessica Thompson has examined ancient bone fragments marked with cut marks, and her work suggests that early hominins were skilled at accessing marrow long before they had the tools or the numbers to reliably hunt large game. That single behavior, cracking bone for marrow, may have offered a caloric lifeline during seasons when plants were scarce and predators had already claimed the best meat. There is also a food source you almost never see in documentaries, even though it may have been more common than the mammoth hunt. Insects, termites, grubs, larvae, small, easy to find, easy to eat raw, and packed with fat and protein. In many parts of the world, insects were not an emergency food. They were a dependable one, steady, low risk, and available almost year-round in warmer climates, unlike a herd of animals that might vanish for a season. None of this fits the image most people carry of a caveman gnawing on a giant drumstick beside a fire. But that image was never really about ancient humans. It was about modern storytelling. It was easier to sell a movie about a heroic hunt than a documentary about someone spending 3 hours digging up a root the size of a carrot. There's one more piece of this puzzle worth sitting with. It's not just what ancient humans ate, it's how unpredictable that eating was. A modern nutritionist might describe an ideal diet in neat percentages: protein here, carbohydrates there, a certain number of calories by a certain hour. Nothing about the ancient diet looked like that. It looked like uncertainty managed through skill, memory, and cooperation. Some weeks were rich in fat from a lucky kill. Some weeks were almost entirely tubers and greens. The body that resulted from that irregularity is not built for consistency. It is built for adaptability, for storing what it can when it can, because storage was the only insurance policy available. Why does any of this matter to you now, scrolling on a couch, nowhere near a savanna? Because your relationship with food is not new. It is inherited. The urge to eat when stressed, that's an ancient signal telling your body to store energy before an unknown threat. The craving for fat and salt, that's a leftover alarm from a world where those nutrients were scarce and precious. Even the modern habit of eating past the point of hunger, just in case, mirrors a survival strategy in a world where the next meal was never guaranteed. You are not broken for craving a snack you don't need. You are running old software on new hardware. Your ancestors' bodies were built by uncertainty. Yours was inherited into certainty, and it still doesn't quite believe it. There is something strangely comforting in that. The impulse that sends you to the fridge at 11 at night isn't a personal failure. It's a message from a very old part of you, one that spent millions of years never knowing where the next meal was coming from, and learned out of necessity to never fully trust abundance. So the next time you open that fridge without really being hungry, notice it. Not with guilt, with recognition. That small automatic reach for food is one of the oldest habits your species has. It kept your ancestors alive through droughts, through winters, through years without a guarantee. You open the fridge, you are not hungry. Not really. But somewhere beneath that thought is a much older one that has never stopped whispering the same simple line it whispered for millions of years. Eat now in case there is nothing later.